Thank you so much for coming to our conference. These are people that really want to make cities better and capitalize on emergence, bring entrepreneurs to the cities and
Thanks for welcoming me here. Hi everybody. My name is Ewen Cameron. I'm CEO of agency and an agency here in New York called Ewen Cameron. We're part of WPP, as you mentioned. And we built our agency, I can tell by the accent, Brooklyn born and bred. And came here in the late 90s, worked for a big international agency, and we split off and built our own company before becoming part of WPP. And the agency was always about culture. We worked with brands like Coca-Cola, Heineken, Hennessy, a lot of the big Unilever now, L'Oreal, people that building sort of cultural relevance to their brand. And I started to get interested in the Metaverse and Web3 right about 2018, 2017, when I started reading about Ethereum. I obviously knew about Bitcoin beforehand, but it was really Ethereum. And to me, it was like when I started reading about how you can have this very one-on-one type relationship with the consumer, but at scale. What the blockchain is able to do, which is unique at scale. I thought this is the answer for marketing. Because we're always trying to do marketing to get to that one-on-one conversation with the consumer. And suddenly, I thought blockchain was the answer. So I started to talk to a lot of people, talk to clients about it. No one was interested. They were just like, go away, this is too complicated. Eventually we got some interest in, but then when I started to talk to creative people about doing NFTs, none of the creative people in the agency were remotely interested. The response was, well, why don't we do a funny commercial about NFTs because they're kind of corny, so we could do a commercial about it. No, I actually want to take it seriously, Really start to build collections for clients that meant something. And then through Jack and Billy, I met Jack and Billy, and Billy is an NYU graduate. The other reason I want him to be here with me today was they were very young. They were like 22, 23 when I met them. They were actually confident in doing what I wanted to actually achieve. And so we went on a journey together. We worked with a bunch of clients. Now we're becoming a leading agency in WPP in the space. I'll show you some of the work in a second. But when Elizabeth asked me to come part of this conference about the Metaverse and cities, obviously we have points of view about, we'll talk about how we think conceptually cities and the Metaverse kind of come together. But I thought more importantly was how can cities help young entrepreneurial companies? And how can we be attractive to companies in the Web3 space? And, Billy, that's a good segue, I think, Billy essentially started this company out of the dorm room at NYU. So, Billy, if I you guys introduce yourselves and then talk a little bit about
Hey everyone, I'm Billy. It's great to be here, back at the Control Center, so I think it's only been like 2 years since I last been here. So I started Insomnia Labs and met Ewen through Jack, and we have this really great Web3 partnership in which we do a lot of solutions, kind of the consulting side of things when it comes to Web3 solutions, things we're building on blockchain, as well as building Metaverse experiences, having like 3D specialists on our team. So, my background was mostly in blockchain engineering, and I've been doing that for around 7 years. Like, before high school, so I was just coding smart contracts. So that's how I ended up meeting Jack through a friend of a friend through NYU, and I'll let him introduce me.
Hi guys, nice to meet you. I'm Jack. I'm the COO of Insomnia Labs alongside Billy. Most of my background is really focused on the marketing strategy side, especially within Web3, which can be a little bit strange at times. But I have a background in mainly marketing and strategy, and it's been great to kind of see this agency come to life. Obviously, the partnership with Ewen Cameron. Ultimately, as Ewen was saying, we really established the comprehensive stack in our agency around now almost 2 years. With really, like, as Ewen was saying, the lack of ability to kind of navigate, especially with blockchain, the difficulty of legal compliance, which is where Billy was a lot of the work, and being able to bring clients into that space in a very comfortable way. And our ability to do that is now grown a lot more. So excited to talk to you guys about kind of how we have navigated, especially as a startup here in New York, and Metaverse in general. So yeah.
I'll just show you a couple of things just so you know maybe a little bit about our work, and then we can get into. So this is just a map of the clients we've been working with. There's definitely the little brand you probably never heard of called Fountain, which is hard salsa, right? Which is interesting because big clients at that point, it's only 2 years ago, so we're not willing to take a risk on Web3, it's too complicated. But through that, the major breakthrough for us is Under Armour. I'm going to show you a little case history about Under Armour. And I think it's interesting because it came out of necessity, right? Under Armour were Steph Curry, you watch basketball, you all know he's the best. Last year, particularly, he had the best season that anyone's had since Michael Jordan. He was about to break the world record for 3-point shots. The most important time for a brand to market their product was right there. They couldn't get the shoe to market because of the global crisis coming out of COVID. They were about to give up. He said, why don't we do a digital shoe? Why don't we do something that was really in the metaverse? We recognized that Steph Curry was actually someone who was in that space. Kids were in that space and did something very, very, very successful. And on the back of that, the big clients at WPP started opening up, and they were starting to invest in Web3 departments, right? So before that, there was no one really responsible for Web3 in the metaverse. But companies like Intel, Coca-Cola, L'Oreal, Unilever, another new company working in that, starting to really invest in the space in terms of putting resources against it, very specifically in Web3, and that started to open up some really interesting opportunities. And what we're seeing is, as even though the market in the short term is obviously problematic, these commitments from big companies are real, and they understand both that this idea of individual or customization of marketing at a massive scale isn't going to be reversed. And they also understand that more immersive experiences are better than less immersive experiences, right? Your TVs, or to young people these days, are not really watching it. They're looking for more immersive experiences. So longer term, this trend will obviously not reverse despite the fact that it's short term. So I'll just show you a couple of things and then we can get into the conversation. We'll just click on this guy. Move on. Oh, sorry. we should actually play this film. I mentioned that the Curry Chance books. I think, you know, as we get into the Metaverse and talking about cities and the role of the Metaverse, I think this is a really interesting case history. I don't know, Jack and Billy, if you might talk about kind of the core idea that led here, which is the insight about how kids play. So if you want to do that, then you guys are holding it.
So at the core of the idea was when, at the end of 2021, when he broke the three-point record, there was this opportunity where first Steph Curry was very into the NFT space, and he was a big proponent of a lot of extra projects coming up. And second, he was about to break that, three-point records. This marketing moment is really exciting. And what was really exciting about the time was a lot of collaboration was happening between a lot of big participants in the ecosystem. So we partnered up with 4 different metaverses to launch this shoe across all of the different platforms. And so the type of kind of tech ingenuity there was the idea of blockchain as a shared data infrastructure. So you're able to use the blockchain, and that would then be used by all the partners to be able to take your one shoe and then put it everywhere, so to speak.
Steph Curry redefined the game of basketball. And on the day he
always happens at technology conferences.
It's the only time Stephen A. Smith couldn't talk. Did you guys do anything for LeBron as he was getting ready to take the scoring title?
So in our business, you can't work for competitors like that. So Under Armour is an ongoing client. So we're doing stuff with obviously Steph moving forward. The big basketball, the other big stars, well, Tom Brady retired. Joe Embiid, the thing that I talked about.
Sure.
And then the NFL group.
So you're working with TV12, is that his group?
Well,
Brady?
Curry's group is SC30, is my group. Jonathan Taylor is one of the football players, and so we're working on for the next NFL season. Project for football. If this doesn't work, we can just sort of move on. But what I want to do, I think, is really skipped over very quickly and very modestly, but really what we really figured out. I mean, Jack's idea, Jack took him, and he was like, the problem with gaming is that, certainly Web3 gaming and Metaverse, is that there is no interoperability. And I think that's probably the general issue with Metaverse, that we all know that, each of these things, it's like the internet in 1993, where we got, American Online and CompuServe. Metaverse at the moment is very siloed. And so Jack was like, if you talk to gamers, they're really frustrated by that, because every time they want to go onto a new platform, they have to buy their skins all over again. I think it's really annoying and expensive. So we thought, what could we solve that problem? Could we solve the problem with interoperability? And Billy solved it because of what I just suggested, which is the blockchain is an open system, that he was able to figure out smart contracts. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I think there was like the tech lift, which was, using the blockchain as like a shared ecosystem. But then Jack went out and talked to each of the partners to get them to, get on board and say like, hey, we'll help you with the marketing push. Hey, we'll get our investment behind it and support it. So I think like it kind of speaks to the nature of the ecosystem, which is very collaborative, and a lot of people have to work together to make things happen. Together. And I think at the end of the day, we'll show you again whether this works. It was a very big success both for us, but for the campaign and the moment that we had to kind of solidify him as their
Steph Curry redefined the game of basketball. And on the day he set a new record, Under Armour planned to drop the Curry 9 to celebrate. But supply chains don't care about records.
Major supply chain disruption.
So what do when the real world won't play? You change the game, just like Steph, by creating a wearable NFT that can move between virtual worlds. The first true Metasneaker, the Genesis Curry Flow. In the Metaverse, what you wear on one platform doesn't exist on the rest. And that really sucks. So we made history by designing the first wearable NFT with the ability to move between virtual worlds. We got 4 competing platforms to work together to create a shoe that can go from here to here, then here, and also here. When our Metasneaker dropped, it landed in a special digital locker where unique versions awaited, letting players travel across digital worlds wearing the same shoe. There they discovered features distinct to each platform. In Decentraland, the shoes glow. On Gala, players earn game tokens. On Sandbox, a basketball court was created exclusively for our Metasneaker. Our platform partners stepped up to promote the sneaker on Twitter, Instagram, and Discord, driving 25 million visitors to our site. On launch day, the drop site crashed in seconds. The Genesis Curry Flow sold out, raising $1 million for charity in just 10 minutes. Prices for a shoe that started at $333 rose as high as $55,000 on OpenSea, generating $17 million in secondary sales and creating an ongoing royalty stream for the brand, while also earning 1.3 billion media impressions. What started out as a quick fix to a business problem has become a game changer for the brand. Just like the player it honors.
Doesn't every city want that?
Okay, is this helpful to see some of this stuff? Or?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I need to go and show the work, and I just don't want to bore you guys. There's only one thing I'm sure. As I said, these are.
I just wanted to ask you just a quick question on how you executed that. So did you create 4 different assets for each different chain effectively and then bind them all through a single token that the user, so when the user minted it, he could have that to access those 4 different.
Yeah, so the 3D model was a GLP file.
Yeah.
And then we had 4 different versions of it that was rigged to the avatars of each platform.
Right.
But then NFT was kind of like the wrapper for that.
Right.
And then if you own that wrapper, you can then take it anywhere. And then, you'll just say, you'll just work.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's very honest about it. But really, like, interoperability is the key, right? And we saw at least in that format, that for a simple thing. So
then how long do you take to divide from the different Metaverse platforms, and what kind of different capabilities you need to kind of coordinate with them in order to make it possible?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a strange idea to think that competitive gaming platforms would work with one another on something like this, but I think we were actually building this in tandem for him to break 3-point records. So I think it ended up being around a month and a half to actually build and sell through the idea of an interoperable asset to these games. But we built a relationship with them over time before that, but really it was a quick turnaround to really try to get them sold in, and then really always had to work in tandem with the technical teams to actually make it a reality. But around a month and a half.
I think the real accomplishment in terms of the gaming integration, we're part of technical, but we have no media. There's absolutely no, there's no advertising, none, because of the crisis that Under Armour was going through with Soul Seeker. And what Jack was able to do with these relationships with the platforms was the insight, and the client didn't really understand this, but he brought it. Look, Decentraland has a massive Twitter feed. They have their own communities. Sandbox has a massive audience. Even RumbleCon, which is a small NFT community, had a big passion on it. Why don't we use those audiences and their passion for Steph Curry as instead of media? So with $0 media, these reach numbers are insane, even for regular advertising media. But to do it with no media, it was really about using the communities. Which I think is another really important part of Metaverse going forward is the power of community. You know, when these communities become passionate around your program, I mean, it would take a lot longer to show you, but you know, some of these communities at the partner, their communities are starting to do Steph Curry shirts, you know, their own version of things, and the creativity of the community being fed into our ecosystem is really, really important. I think it's something very powerful going forward with whatever the Metaverse reveals for cities.
Let me also add, like, Gala Games, which is one of the examples of one of the shoes that was interoperable, because gaming is so inherently global, right? To its point of like bringing an audience, Gala specifically had a really massive audience in Korea at that time, and it was like pretty early within the Korean like Web3 NFT market. But a lot of our holders, or a lot of people who ended up buying the shoe were actually Korean, and the secondary sales you see as a result from the Under Armour case study, a big chunk of that came down to the Korean foundation trying to acquire the shoe so that they could have the benefits in their game that they're playing on. It's called Downside. So again, just emphasizing like, gaming in terms of the media play, it's such a global experience.
Please.
When you were going through the planning stage, was there any consideration for allowing people to purchase the NFTs with fiat currency? So that, you know, it basically becomes more accessible. I mean, in the gaming communities, I mean, people who understand sort of like, you know, tokens and like, you know, EE and like, you know, that digital wallets, it's sort of like minded, they'll just do it. But for broader audiences, there's a technical gap that exists. So what was the consideration for allowing people to buy with fiat currency, or saying, no, we just have an audience, and the audience is engaged enough, so we'll stay with sort of like, you know, cryptos?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. We get asked that all the time because people don't really want to own wallets, right? Because it's like a liability. There are like security concerns potentially. But I think at the end of the day, you know, there are multiple ways to kind of get on board. And you know, nowadays, I think a really good solution is called Bitgo, and it allows you to kind of more of a traditional, you know, password, and you will kind of do the rest of the what we did for this was we did have to create, you know, a MetaMask wallet, which is, you know, a traditional option wallet, and had used a Stripe integration. So people were paying with a credit card, so they didn't have to pay using cryptocurrency, which is, you know, hard to get depending on where you are. So you were able to pay using a fiat on-ramp, but then you receive the actual shoe in your blockchain wallet. So it was kind of a hybrid solution. And nowadays, you know, you can use Bitgo without saying you know, completely fiat on-ramp, email password, your normal account creation type of flow, or we see a little more hybrid, which will allow you to do with both crypto and fiat, which usually is better to open up the audience.
Good work.
I have a question. I wonder if you've noticed, I've noticed like there's this kind of synergy between traditional open source assets and Web3, where there's a lot of times, like, well, in the indie market for this stuff, like, a lot of their fashion designs are based on the same model, the same like humanoid models that are sort of open source, and so you have this like CC0 foundation that then the cosmetics are added on to that. And the CC0 helps with the interoperability and like availability, and then there's another layer on top of that where you put sort of any of that relationship between open source and Web3.
Yeah, so I think like that's where a lot of the jungle starts coming in, where it comes sometimes you know Outpaint. So it's like an AI that you can use to kind of reconfigure different textures with the same kind of like 3D model. And so we use some of that among like other types of technologies to kind of transition the model from one to the other. But to your point, you know, everything that you create on the blockchain is transparent and public, so it's inherently open source, but maybe it doesn't apply. I don't know like the laws that kind of come with that in terms of like the open source, like Apache license, like those types of things. But in terms of visibility, automatically everything that you do is going to be out there.
like I'm seeing some game studios just releasing the assets from their game as Creative Commons Zero, as a promotional tactic, and then maybe also selling something else alongside that. So it's interesting.
One thing, just one other case. This is very much live right now. This is a L'Oreal project we're launching as we speak. But I wanted to bring it to your attention because I think it connects to some of the agenda that you're thinking through from a city point of view. And so this is the gorgeous DAO. And we wanted to bring the idea of DAO to the floor because I think that, again, thinking about cities, thinking about organizational structures, DAOs are really interesting ways to get things done collaboratively in this space. So L'Oreal came to us with this brand called NYX. And NYX is a brand that is about beauty through inclusion and diversity, right? And they were finding that in Web 2, what's happened with all these super influencers, let's call it the Kardashian effect, is that beauty is becoming very, very homogenized. It's all about likes, it's about followers, and it's not just homogenized, it's become toxic. So they were like, is Web3 an opportunity to come at this from a different perspective? And we were, the Metaverse, actually, think about the Metaverse, it's the one place where it doesn't matter how tall you are, how good looking you are, or how your hereditary genes are, it's your imagination. So how can you, with creativity and imagination, create the future of beauty with a brand that believes in diversity and inclusion? And so we give it this idea called the Gorgeous DAO. The Gorgeous DAO is, we launched it with a pass that has financial value, that then goes into treasury, it goes to commission artists, 3D artists that are out in the mainstream. So the first collection of avatars will be dropping very shortly. But it's interesting, I had a video that we were going to what we find is that, the expressions of beauty that's coming from the Metaverse are so much more interesting than what's coming from social media, because you've freed it up from all the crap that things in social media. It's just purely about imagination, and in some ways it takes you back to where maybe the Renaissance was, or like where beauty, which has always been a very central theme in human culture. The artists expressed it in interesting ways, in abstract ways, and, et cetera, et cetera. The Metaverse maybe optimistically enable us to do that in a way that, not just beauty, but other aspects of humanity that can be much more freely expressed. I wanted to share that with you because it makes us optimistic about what the Metaverse can bring to the table versus what Web 2 has done to us all.
So you guys, I'm assuming you're on the Ethereum chain, is that?
Yeah, this is what we're doing now.
So are you finding that you're getting almost like a commercial strat? You guys have had such great success, but are you finding that the guilt by association with crypto is kind of impacting how you message a little bit, and how that state, the concern about is Ethereum security, you must be thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, but you can answer this if you want, but I think we work a lot with Polygon, which is right. So this is on Ethereum. Curry is on Polygon. Yeah. Why do you answer that question?
Yeah. So I think today there are a ton of blockchains now that have kind of solved that issue that Ethereum being kind of more of a legacy technology, having transitioned into proof of stake, et cetera, just aren't able to answer. So I think for us, it actually a lot of times depends on the enterprise that we work with. Each of them will have their own Web3 playbook, they have their own guidelines that they adhere to. What we see is that from a commercial standpoint, as you're saying, like Ethereum is still king, but that is actually declining very rapidly, and that is going to other chains like Avalanche, like Polygon, Solana, things like that. And so we're kind of seeing the shift where traditionally you would launch on Ethereum, which is the largest blockchain, and now it's kind of going into a layer 1, layer 2 situation. But yes, I think you would see a lot of studies that come out with Deloitte or BCG that they partner up with the chain to kind of measure the environmental impact, because that used to be a very big thing, and still is a very big thing as it pertains to any type of proof of work blockchain scale. But I imagine after everything's transitioned into a different proof of stake mechanism, that should no longer be an issue.
I was thinking it might be good if, just for your subject matter, to segue a little bit to experiences that you've had as a group in working with different cities around the world and different groups. So obviously, you should talk about New York because that's where you were born, and you guys have been involved with NFT, NYC, and we'll come back to that in a second. But what from New York, but just so you know, and I wasn't involved in this. These guys did it. We were working with Emirates. Emirates is really a very interesting company in terms of obviously its relationship with Dubai, but also its own kind of commitment to the Metaverse and the vision for the Metaverse, which we talked about. L'Oreal and the company behind this in Paris. I think recently that Paris and the whole kind of French government is woken up to Web3. I mean, the First Lady came to the meeting, right? In Paris, when they were doing an event. So we can talk a little bit about what we've learned from those cities. Would that be helpful? Is that given your subject matter? Okay, so let's talk about your experiences in New York, Paris, Dubai. Like, what do you see with these different cities? Who's doing well? What do they bring in terms of attracting young companies in the space to be in that environment? So maybe you guys can talk about that.
I can start off with the Emirates example. I think we were working with Emirates Airlines on reason for them. I think they took a three-pronged approach to. We'll start off as a two-pronged approach, and now it's become a three-pronged approach to what the Metaverse provides for them. That can be simply split into like AI, which is the most recent category, Web3 blockchain, and obviously like 3D experiences and what would be more defined as traditional metaverse. And when we first talked to them, they were really interested in the idea of training in the metaverse. And you can think about it, the Emirates and that ecosystem, quite frankly, right, it's built a lot on expatriates, right? And as a result of that, they tend to do most of the labor, especially within the airline businesses, the pilots, the hostess, etc. And they were explaining to us, and I didn't understand this until they showed us in detail what the experience looks like, but it's extremely costly for Emirates Airlines to train people to fly airplanes or to even be hostess. Why? Because they have to basically take decommissioned planes, bring them onto tarmacs that are not active, and then have people train within those airplanes. And so, well, where does the Metaverse come into play for this, right? And so they've been spending a lot of time focusing at, imagine you could send a VR kit to someone's home with a pre-built training program built into it to train people on how to be flight attendants for airplanes, right? So obviously we see a lot of examples in the Metaverse for interaction, concerts, etc. But it's really interesting to see how Emirates is tackling it as purely as a business problem, right? To allow people to do training at scale without having to do, bringing in decommissioned planes, etc. And you can see what from a carbon footprint perspective of having, purely digital training experiences, what that can look like at scale for Emirates in the long run. So I don't know if you want to add anything at the end.
Yeah, I think Emirates is definitely very interesting. Obviously, you don't want all your flight attendants to not have actual training, but at the same time, you can cut a lot of costs if you have a good portion of that training, be done via satellite, right? Like via VR experiences, where they are able to kind of immerse themselves and learn before getting into the building and before getting into those planes. So you can cut a bunch of educational costs there. So I think there are a lot of use cases that are similar to this where it comes to training for enterprises, especially like on the ground support teams, like technical teams, like operational teams, who would benefit, especially as the workforce becomes more remote, to have this type of kind of immersive training programs that are beneficial to these enterprises.
What about the more practices like what in Emirates, when Dubai, Paris, New York, what are these cities doing like to attract businesses like yourself, young people that are starting? So why is Dubai so much? Is it just taxation? I mean, is there anything else? Is it culture? Is
taxation is big, for sure. Like, I mean, you have favorable tax laws for especially like Web3 companies in Dubai. Paris, I don't think they have something like that, but in Lisbon, they definitely do. I think like with Paris, we were just in Paris for NFT Paris, and what was really interesting is that there's a lot of young people, a lot of entrepreneurs there. They both have a lot of energy and funding behind supporting creators who are building in space, 3D people, 3D technologists who are helping build kind of these virtual spaces, as well as like software developers, software engineers who are advancing kind of the graphical side of things. So there is less, I think, financially incentivizing, but more around the hub and the ecosystem of the people.
I mean, I think just as a observation I've seen in France is the kind of partnership between private and public. The L'Oreal's are very big companies and they have a lot of influence, and so their influence, I think, allied with the government, they're aware of and awake to the power of the private sector, even though that's always their attention in French culture. Bubbles to the surface a lot. In fact, the riots were there when you were there. But I think there's definitely that energy going on in Paris. I mean, I don't know about New York City. I don't know the government side of New York City, but I think a lot of young people here because the cultural energy around what you're saying. I mean, that's the attraction for it's investors, it's the venture capital that gets attracted to it. And what are the other factors that tie a company like yourselves to a city?
Well, not to be boastful, but NYU having like educational seminars and like professors who are willing to teach about blockchain very early on is definitely helpful to grow kind of a younger generation of people who are enthusiastic about Web3, enthusiastic about the Metaverse. And we see this happening across many different colleges and even at like the high school level. Right? We have a lot of young people in the city who are very excited about what the Web3 can mean from like a decentralization perspective, but from also like a social perspective, right? Which is access, more transparency, right? Like access to capital, access to liquidity, being able to work together more seamlessly, which I think is very attractive to a younger generation.
I also say it's interesting. New York was the capital of Web3 for the last two years. But I think as of currently right now, that crown kind of belongs to Paris, Lisbon. And I think the reason for that is, it sounds like a cliche, but a lot of the feedback, especially for such a community that's focused on decentralization and blockchain, is that NFT NYC, which is a conference that happens here annually, has become overly corporate, is what people say. Oftentimes the issue with that is that people are here, especially when we're doing stuff in blockchain, what people are building are such small components of a greater whole, right? And when I come to a conference or I come to a space that I'm trying to meet new people, often the goal is to vet and try to meet the best builders, the best creators out there, to hopefully create a bigger whole. And when when it's overly corporate, the conferences and experiences, right, you put to the forefront the people who just have purely the most money, rather than those who are building the best experiences, the best technology, etc. The best anecdote, the best way to understand that is almost zero people that I knew who went to NFT NYC this year had bought a ticket to the conference itself. The feedback this year is that all the side events, the invite-only dinners, the come hang out with me for the first time ever, and meeting you for the first time ever in real life was super meaningful and successful. But the actual events, these places where there's a ton of money being poured into by companies like Coinbase and MoonPay, etc., no one's going, which can continue to dilute the existence of Web3 and the Metaverse in general. So that happens to be.
So can you contrast that with NFT Paris? Just so we're looking at the two side by side.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like the feedback for NFT Paris was actually the exact opposite, which is interesting. NFT Paris, everyone was at the event. The reason that everyone was at the event is that they provided a fair and equal experience for builders and companies to actually connect and talk to one another. There was more people and more important people at NFT Paris this year than there has ever been in NFT NYC combined. So I don't know if you want to comment.
Just to add on to that, NFT Paris had a direct relationship with the biggest colleges in Paris, and they had heavily, I think 95% off tickets for students, so that the younger generation, people who were actually interested in the space, would be there and provide that energy, for everybody else. So that was very interesting for us to see as well.
What about Lisbon? Okay. Any other insights? Those cities? Oman. Yeah, I was at ETH Denver this year, and Billy will tell you I'm the last person to understand how coding works. It's a very technical conference, so I'll say I was extremely humbled by the fact that I was there. The energy around the technology that we're trying to build something on is definitely exciting. I think why ETH Denver fundamentally does a really good job is that at its base, what it builds is what they call hacker houses, right? So most chains sponsor pretty heavy hacker houses, and then they bring in a lot of young talent to those hacker houses, and then they from there are almost like a small family for a period of time that then expands into the conference, right? And then you go to the conference and you get all these products and chains, etc. And these people who are going to be the next technical builders of the space, who have been flown in, who have been paid for, who are going to be housed in these cities, right now have access to the most important connections and technology out there. I think that's fundamentally what made Denver specifically super successful. It was a hacker. It was a hacker event built on the premise of bringing in the best talent.
What about Miami? Is that Miami?
I went to Miami. I think Miami's an interesting one. Again, I think it's become overly corporate as an event. And it is more of like a cultural and social hub. I do think, obviously, with taxation exemptions within Florida, a lot of the fundamental Web3 people who are based in the Miami ecosystem are people who are very diehard, decentralized, Web3 focused. Yeah, what we would call a degen in our world. But the culture there is really about. I think the most value that they get is connecting the digital to the physical, where people who have never met each other get to meet each other for the first time. And these networks, especially within the Web3 space, these communities are very high network, high value individuals who are now being able to socialize and connect and network. Honestly, can create a lot of value. I think that's where Miami lies, number one.
If our mayor was sitting between the two of you and asking you for your advice, what would you tell our mayor he could do to make New York a better place?
Say it louder.
There was one thing I thought that was really interesting. My time in New York in Web3. There used to be this place called Empire Dow. It was right across. I walked in there and it was one room. Someone was a painter, but also a Web3 artist. Another room, someone had $100 million short on Tether, which was crazy. And then another person was building the next minting stack for Web3. And it was all built around the fundamental idea of providing space for Web3 people to come hang out and build. And honestly, anyone I talk to is like, this is the best place to be in Web3 because I can't build everything, but I can go to the room next door to me, right? And I can find that resource. The issue is that place no longer exists. The reason because of that is largely funding. And that confuses me because as someone in Web3, I know how much money there is. There's more money than any other place that I've seen. So why can't we focus on providing support to places that honestly continue to push forward the metaverse and continue to move forward.
I'd like to push you on it a little more here for a moment. You should have a mayor and you can ask him anything. Are there some people in New York you wanted to bring together around dinner at Grace Mansion that you're invited to? Pardon?
You want me to answer that? Well, so I think one of the bigger problems is not just New York City, it's just New York State in general, is the licensing for custody of assets for crypto and NFTs in general. And it's extremely difficult. It is, I don't want to say this in front of everybody, but I think it's relying on personal connections to be able to get those licenses, right? So it needs to be a lot more accessible for companies to, acquire custodial licenses in order for the space to advance as a whole. What I mean by that is, if you go to, like Y Combinator last year had, I think, like 40 to 50 different startups that came up with a custodial solution for blockchain machine learning or blockchain AI. All of these needed licenses if they were to operate in New York to do the exact same thing, which is problematic because now you're taking away all the other talent who otherwise would want to, create startups here. We're kind of more, fortunate because we do a lot more solutioning where we put together different solutions so we don't run into that issue. But we also see a lot of our friends who decide that, hey, we're going to move to Paris, hey, we're going to move to Lisbon, or we're going to move to San Francisco because it's really hard to navigate kind of the compliance and regulatory guidelines here.
Can I just point out, like, when Paris is considered a light regulation?
The tax solution that had the Empire Hub or whatever it was, and in that hub somebody was going to help you navigate. Would they need to still change the rules, or would that be sufficient? Don't look. Just want to push this.
I just was going to, like, if Paris is light regulation, like, no, get away from New York's heavy hand, like, it really.
Yeah, no, I think that's not like regulation, but we're talking more the cultural side of things. I think that, my point of view on this, and I don't know in the regulation side, I'm a critic. I think it starts with vision. Like, what is your vision to the metaverse in New York City? And I think that the problem is, if I was sitting next to the man asking what his vision is, because I think that it gets too muddled up in things like crypto, and all the negativity that goes around that, or NFTs or what, and not. I discovered the metaverse. Take a minute to tell you because I think it's relevant to the New York thing. I'm a cyclist and I raced, not so much now, but I was a competitive racer. And in the winter in New York City, we cyclists get indoors and go on our thing called Zwift and we ride our bikes and use smart trainers, right? And you can ride your bike in New York City through Central Park. And if you're an obsessive cyclist, and I am, you get riding around Central Park in Zwift. My heart rate is exactly the same as it would be in the real world. The contours are exactly the same. The watts on my bike is exactly. It's incredibly how good the metaverse is at replicating the real world. But what happens that makes it more interesting because you get bored. You're going around the same Central Park road. There's a certain point in Zwift where you go off, take off at the left, and you've got these translucent kind of cycle paths into the skyscrapers of New York, and it becomes a fantasy, right? It becomes a thing that only New York could do. And I think that's the issue that the city's facing in a way is like, give me a vision. New York is a cinematic place. And that's why I wanted to show you that the stuff with gorgeous and the idea of beauty, right? Beauty is, in the real world, is it's down to who your parents are and what social norms decide beauty is about. In the metaverse, it's entirely freed up to be whatever you can imagine to be. And I think that, to me, is where I was talking to the mayor. I said, what's your vision for what New York can be in the metaverse? And then build it. Because obviously there's lots of practical things like you got a DMV in the metaverse, which would save us all going to 34th Street. Is that a cool thing? I don't know. Maybe even more boring than the real world. But would it be? I'm sure you've all seen things like Google Walks, where they did the walk in Marseille, and the metaverse is a mental place. It's not a physical place. It's how we extend reality extend the human capacity to do things that are imaginative. And nowhere's better than that in New York City. I mean, the city is built on that. So you have to have, I think, that vision and then implement the logistical stuff to actually make it happen. That's one person's point of view. Could be wrong.
I'm curious about the gorgeous or gorge.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation, by the way. So when you have an existing brand like L'Oreal that gets into NFTs, I'm not sure about the nature of your relationship, if whether it's on a table or it was project-based, but you created this community, and I do see that the floor price has gone down like everything, right? So once you create a community like NFTs, you find that people want continued utility and communication, and then the onus is on L'Oreal to continue an investment in this community that they've created, and then you have to come up with solutions to make them feel like they're getting value when there's value going down. This is part one, and then part two is, do you see the Metaverse as a solution to that? Because it is less expensive. It could be less expensive to create access through virtual spaces to, Stephen Curry. I don't know if that's considered a community or else, but you know what I'm saying? Do you see the Metaverse as a solution to add value in a cost-efficient way?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let these guys answer that. I think your point about community is really well taken, and the reason, the only thing I'll say behind that is it is a little bit of be careful what you ask for, because once you open a community, you've got to be constantly engaged. So, I mean, things like Discord is so non-stop. I mean, Jack in particular is pretty tired right now because we've been doing that with Gordon non-stop. You have to be engaged constantly. You can't just start and then walk away, which I think is what a lot of brands struggle with because they're used to doing an ad campaign, right? You're doing your Super Bowl commercial and then you go off and do something else. You can't do that in Web3 because once you go down the route of opening up a community, but I mean, you're really
That's a sensitive topic in my online for the last month, but it's hard, right? Because you think about Gorgeous specifically, we have English speaking, our biggest part of the community is actually Chinese, we have Japanese, Korean, French, and Spanish speaking channels, and then you have that like English community. And it's that, to your point, exactly. It's like it's a subscription that you pay for once, and for some reason you assume that you will receive value for the rest of your life. That's the issue with finding the right formula for NFTs. And even communities like Artifacts, right, or Nike have been feeling this issue as of recently and reflected in their floor price. I think I agree 100%. Like we're exploring currently the idea of doing a virtual gallery with the artists, right, that we have within now in order to showcase their art, which is less expensive than doing a physical gallery. And around NFT NYC, we got quotes for $15,000 to $30,000 to do a gallery pop-up or 2 paintings in one space where there's other people doing showcase, right? There's a ridiculous amount of money for such little return. So I do agree that the Metaverse and the digital assets as a reward can definitely reduce the consistent price that a brand will have to pay. But I agree with you fundamentally. One of our friends always say all NFTs are trending to zero for those financial assets because of that equation. You cannot continue to give value in perpetuity. And whoever solves that value equation goes, okay, we got to create something that doesn't continuously demand, will solve the Web3 NFT equation. But I agree, community is the hardest part of dealing with it.
Thank you very much, guys. It's fascinating. I have a question because I see that a lot of time is spent on conflating the concept of NFTs all into visual arts, all into creative design and things like that. And perhaps not enough is being said about the application of tokenization as it applies to non-fungible assets in general, right? As far as advertising world, there's royalties, there's all types of streams of income that an artist could could garnish by utilizing this technology. And I was wondering if you've given thought to it because of the industry you're in, or has this really been your only focus as far as NFT art is concerned and visual representations?
No, I mean, I actually think what you're saying is more important. I mean, the art was just an access point. It was an easy access point because people understood it. Like art is unique piece and there's value attached to it. So art became the access point into NFTs. But NFTs, whatever you want to call it, I mean, nobody even wants to call it an NFT anymore if you're embarrassed about it. The actual functionality is much more powerful. And I think it links to what was you were saying. Sorry, I can't see you linking my else. What I think in the brand space, people are pivoting towards is loyalty. Because it's a token. Once you have the token, copy in the commercial exchange, you buy a pair of sneakers in the store, that's the last you're engaging with that brand before you wear them and then you leave. But when you have a token, it's the beginning of the engagement. So now you have a reason to have a relationship with that consumer. And what you do with that relationship is infinite. I mean, it's not, you have something to do with that, you have something to do with experiences, you have something to do with discounts and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's become the most important sort of application in the commercial world. And I think it has obviously relevance for cities and, how you build like habits and loyalty, how you incentivize people on an ongoing basis to be involved in civil society, tokenization can really drive that. But it still goes back to the practical sense of what Jack's saying that it is tiring because if you're really going to engage people on an ongoing basis, you've got to give them value. It may not be financial value. You have to make it worthwhile because they'll tell you. Web3 is a very direct experience. People will come out and tell you that's garbage. Why are you doing this in my time? So yes, I think fundamentally tokenization is where it's at, and I think people will be increasingly aware of that. But the other side of it is figuring out how to do that in a way that doesn't result in non-stop sucking of resources to keep that level of engagement. Any other questions? Or we'll get Will may have come in.
Yeah, it's more of a comment to a question that Liz posed earlier, and that is, if you are sitting next to the mayor, what would you tell him or her, really? And the insights you share around like a building that is like a resource for people to work together was powerful. Having worked with different mayors, I think there's also an opportunity for people to communicate to mayors in a language they understand, which is missing. I don't know any mayor on earth right now that you go to and say, build a metaverse, and they'll just jump on board because there's something interesting or something that is being promoted. So rather ask you, what problem is it going to solve? Because if they look at their phone or their email, they have citizens probably complaining about potholes or trash that has not been picked up on time, or they are thinking of like the net collection cycle, or what are the values of the city, and how do they address climate change. They are bigger problems that they're trying to solve. And the metaverse or Web3 related technologies can help solve those problems, but someone has to make that translation. So one suggestion is to just crystallize the vision for that year and say, if you want to have more affordable homes for residents, the metaverse can help you get there, and this is how. This is how other cities have tried to solve the problem. If you want to make a city more resilient from a climate change perspective, this is how the metaverse will help you get there. I see it as a communication issue and a learning opportunity for makers and creators to also speak the language of politics or figure out how to engage in political dialogue. Because let's say someone's about to build the next highest tower next to you, you're probably concerned about your loss of access to sunlight. But there's a process to engage in to get that solution. And if you sit on the sidelines, you're not actually going to get far. So learning the language of mayors, crystallizing the problem and the solution, and making it less about the metaverse and more about the problem that you are solving, I think will help people get really far with the incredible ideas and solutions that they have.
As well.
Sorry, just one more, and you want one thing I want to really watch time. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to build on this and say that the presence of corporate is not necessarily the negative. It's about how you can leverage the ecosystem everywhere. It's a different maturity model, and maybe engage the corporate at the same level of translation, right? In a way, because that's where the funding. We've heard from Vanya that the main issue is monetization. And that's where, how do you engage with the corporate in such a way that they don't kill the kind of the grassroots, et cetera. And Matt, if you think of the opportunities that the universities can offer, and there's, just look around New York City, how can, I'm thinking sitting here, not just the mayor and our relationship with the mayor's office, but what can NYU do? All the way how it trickles down to all of our programs. That's what we're trying to do in SBS, right? Because the level of influence and engagement that we can generate sitting in this really diverse city is almost limitless. And the presence of the corporate financing and creating those environments could be also leveraged to help the city, to help the community. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
Go ahead, real fast.
You spoke about the moving away from JPEGs and art and loyalty being the sort of new frontier for brands. One of the big promises of NFTs is digital scarcity. I'm curious to see what's happening, what you'll see happening with media, NFTs and crypto as tokenization of media. In the marketing, brand, participation in the space?
It's a great question. We actually have a really cool case history with P3, but we're about out of time. But I think we think. Actually, why don't you talk about NFT? Because really, we just launched the second generation of the Steph Curry campaign. It was in the finals last year, where young people are not watching TV, and so our idea was, could we link NFT scarcity and rarity and collectability to media to drive a young audience? And so we did a NFT drop that was live, linked through live data. Every time that Steph scored a 3-point shot, you could mint an NFT. And so we drove 8%, 9%?
6 million people.
6 million. We drove 8% or 9% of NBA's audience for the final driven from this event. So, so the answer, I think, is NFT, and then it goes to the other question of the application of NFT. It's limitless. And that was a good example of using new media to revitalize old media. Because kids don't want to watch TV, but they will turn up to collect something that's scarce. And I think that the thing that, I think maybe got too confused with, let's call it NFT 1.0, is that scarcity doesn't just mean money. There's lots of other ways to have scarcity. There's scarcity of experience. There's all kinds of ways that NFT can, people still want something unique, but it doesn't have to be so elitist, and I think in kind of conventional in that sense. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I do think NFTs are the blockchain can really reinvigorate traditional media by linking collectability and scarcity to broad awareness. And we've been, since that event, we've now, several of the big media companies like NBC and the NFL, and they're all kind of talking to us about the application of that type of approach to traditional media. I don't know if you want to explain that.
Well, I think if we were to zoom out a little bit, blockchain in its whole is a sharing, right? The idea is that you have something that everybody can see and people can mess with it, right? In terms of transfer of value and transfer of access and transfer of experience and things. And I think if that's the core, any type of experience or program or tool or campaigns or DAOs that you're building on it has to have that in mind, which is how are we sharing in a way that is not necessarily equal, but makes everybody equally unhappy, right? And towards a certain goal. And I think when we talk about loyalty programs, what is actually being shared is the rewards and the partnership and how to onboard people onto that is essentially you're able to build an Amex program much easily from a tech and operational standpoint using blockchain technology. But then you would still need, like I and Jack, like a partnership level of agreement between people. And so we can talk about like the tech all day long and like the shared benefits, but in order for the applications to work, it is a people-to-people relationship at the end of the day. So no matter how you're utilizing that technology, you have to get the game theory right. Like it has to feel good to everybody. And I think when we talk about like private versus public, when we talk about peer-to-peer, it is just a way to streamline transactions. But it's reporting transactions that at the end of the day, everybody's kind of seeing
So I just got a message that Mayor Sheevy's going to be a few minutes late. So that might be what's the word? Sign from heaven that we want a little more of you.
Do you have a question?
That's great. That was awesome.
Yeah. Sorry, please.
I put a picture in there.
Sorry. So, first of all, it's really sharing communities. Really what the very essence of blockchain, right? It's building an immutable, decentralized, and distributed environment. But the real world doesn't operate that way. So the real world has regulation, has KYC, AML. The real world has banking regulations, lawyer client. The real world has companies that simply can't allow themselves to operate in these permissionless open networks. So in your view, how much of the near-term progress is really going to be in these decentralized permissionless networks versus permission networks that are built on layer one solutions that banks are doing, for example, today, and a lot of institutions are doing. There's a land grab for this stuff now, and they're all trying to squeeze it into a bottle of their own. You know what I mean? So what is your take on this?
Yeah, that's really funny because my second project ever was with JP Morgan Chase, and I helped with Quora.
Quora, sure.
Yeah, so that was, that was
great.
2017, right? Like, and one of the biggest questions that they asked themselves is like, well, why are we not doing this on the Ethereum blockchain? Why are we cloning the Ethereum blockchain and trying to redo this, in the side mode? Isn't this against the ethos? It was like a very big debate across the whole thing. And what we actually landed on was that for a lot of these enterprises, this is a R&D, right? Like, if you go up all the way up to the president, if they were looking at it, they said this is an R&D operation. We can kill this in an instant. We want it so that it is a controllable environment where we can learn about aspects of everything before we then, nowadays, Bitcoin is actually transacting on chain. Now we know in 2023, all the operations since 2017 was up to this moment so that they can now do transfers in a public way because they have learned about how it works from a very deep level all the way up. So I think they're very close with like UI from a compliance standpoint. That's what it is to work with.
Ernst & Young.
Ernst & Young, yeah. And I think that is definitely the point, which is, okay, you need to start off in a more controlled environment when you know nothing, right? And then over time, as you understand the variables and how they interplay, then branching off into this wild, wild west, which is a decentralized, permissionless ecosystem.
Which makes places like Wyoming much easier to operate in than New York City, of course.
Definitely. And Nevada.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that also one thing that we haven't touched on is the kind of equitability of access to Web3. One of the things we're doing with Under Armour is we spotted this whole gaming world that we started with Steph Curry and blah. There's all these kids who are amazing at gaming. They could be amazing at Web3 gaming, but they don't have Wi-Fi. Or they don't have good enough Wi-Fi. There's Wi-Fi deserts, whatever. So again, if the mayor was sitting here, that's something you should do something about. I mean, get with Verizon and create access to Wi-Fi because it's not just from an equitable point of view. I think that's important, but also just from an experiential point of view. Part of the reason why, all these clients, all these companies, Samsung and all, they all built big experiences in the metaverse. People turned up, it wasn't very much fun. They left and didn't go back. Why? Because Wi-Fi was a terrible broadband experience. And so, that I think both from an equitable point of view and also just from an experiential point of view is something that a mayor should be engaging in with the private sector. That sounds like you have actually right there.
Yeah, the mayor's about to join us, right, Brian?
We either wing that the mayor talk.
Is that right? Brian?